Welcome to Beyond the Blockchain with Scott Tyndall, a discussion of blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, and why it matters to you.
All right, folks, welcome to Beyond the Blockchain. I'm your host, Scott Tyndall. Thanks for joining us this week. I think we've got a lot of fun in store for tonight. We're going to be talking with Taylor Peake from Motion Mobs. This is a Birmingham-owned, women-owned technology company that's been around for, over a decade. And Taylor and our team just have a tremendous resource of knowledge. And I'm excited that she's going to get to share that with us tonight. After we visit with Taylor, we're also going to have Tate jump on again, and we're going to talk about Footium and our quest to buy a Web3 soccer club. I know if you haven't heard some of the other episodes, that may sound crazy to you, but there is this thing called Web3 soccer, and essentially it's if you took your old Madden football game and all the time you spent preparing and investing in your franchise mode, but then you could sell it. That's what Web3 is doing, and that's what is available with Footium. So that's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. And so I think we've got a really good show planned for today. One of the things that popped up on some of my notifications today was some of the stuff going on in Web3, blockchain, and crypto. There's just headlines everywhere, and I can't really understand some of them. We need to dive into more of this. One of the things that stuck out to me, and somebody brought it up to me, was Decentraland, which is, we've talked about before, this kind of idea of a metaverse and Web3 and buying and selling real estate inside of this ecosystem. Well, Decentraland is about a $1.2 billion valuated company, right? What does that mean? It means somebody thinks it's worth $1.2 billion. But the latest article today says there may be fewer than 1,000 daily users on the platform. Now, the platform, obviously, Decentraland, they have a different statement. They think there's a lot more than 1,000 people using this, and probably maybe even 4,500, maybe 8,000. But the question still remains. With a $1.2 billion valuation. Nobody's a bigger fan of Web3 than me, I assure you. But you do have to start to wonder where these valuations come from when you see something like that, and know that the coin is available to be bought and sold. So it just makes you wonder. What we talk about all the time on this show is about practicality, right? So we can believe in the future and also believe that there needs to be some practicality involved there. So I think this conversation probably deserves a lot bigger deep dive than we can do tonight, but maybe next week. I think if we're lucky, maybe we can get Johnny Gwynn on to talk to us about Decentraland and this sandbox, this idea of the metaverse, and this idea of building for the future, knowing that you don't necessarily have that many users today, but the valuation is built on the future. And that's one of the things that I love about Taylor, who will be joining us in just a second, is she's all about the future. She's about the vision of the future. She's been doing this for quite a while, and I think we can all learn a tremendous amount from her. Also tonight, we'll be looking at some of the other headlines, and beyond Decentraland, which I think that's just a kind of wild headline. This is not really Web3, but it kind of is. There's this article out there now that says that Elon Musk was in touch with Vladimir Putin several weeks ago before tweeting out his idea that maybe the people in the annexed parts of Ukraine should be voting on which country they want to join. But I've also seen some reports now that where Elon has said that is not true. He didn't text him or talk to him, and he hasn't actually talked to him in 18 months or so, and that was about space. So you say, like, why does that matter about Beyond the Blockchain? And it's about Starlink. So Starlink is SpaceX's mobile satellite-based internet, and it's been according to most reports, a resounding success in the Ukraine in keeping the Ukrainian service members connected to one another, as well as keeping the Ukrainian people connected to one another. So this idea of connectivity and blockchain does make sense. And I think that's an important story that we need to follow along as well, even though it's not right exactly down the alley of what we do here at Beyond the Blockchain. Philip, what is your take on this? So you've been paying attention to any of that, or does that ring a bell with you?
I know that Elon was trying to get some additional internet connectivity for Ukraine, and that was putting him kind of in a hot chair,
Yeah.
a hot seat, trying to get that done. And so I know that's been a controversy, but hey, I mean, those are customers too.
That's right. So that's a great point. So we've got Philip here helping us work the board tonight, keeping me between the white and the yellow, so we can, keep the show going where we want it to. So before, just to remind you, we've talked about Decentraland. Hopefully, we'll get Johnny Gwynn on next week to talk about that. We talked about some headlines. I'm also seeing headlines now that saying that Bitcoin mining is becoming cool again, which is interesting. Because, it wasn't too long ago, nobody wanted to talk about Bitcoin mining due to the energy consumption. But now, maybe that's something that we'll talk about next week as well. All right, folks, we're going to go to break real quick. When we come back, Taylor Peake from Motion Mobs. She's going to tell us everything about the future and how women are creating it. And that's exciting to me as the father of 3 daughters. So when we come back on Beyond the Blockchain.
Welcome back to Beyond the Blockchain with Scott Tyndall.
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Scott Tyndall. You're listening to Beyond the Blockchain. We are live every Wednesday night here on 106.5. Somebody needs to do some fact checking on us, but I believe, Philip, that we are one of the only shows in the world, in the whole wide world, that does a live show about blockchain technology and Web3. We need to fact check that, but I feel really good about that statement. I feel very confident that we're one of just a handful, which means absolutely nothing other than it's fun to say. Yeah. All right, so I teased you before the break that Taylor Peake would be joining us to talk Motion Mobs and just Vision Cast about the future. I love the way this woman's brain works, and so it is my great pleasure to have Taylor join us on the show. Taylor, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott.
Taylor, you are we're down here in Mobile. You're based out of Birmingham. Tell us a little bit about what Motion Mobs does and kind of the background about your story and this powerful team that you've built here.
Yeah, so we are based in Birmingham. So this year Motion Mobs is 12 years old, and so it's really interesting to think about how much the company and just the landscape of technology has changed in 12 years generally. But when we started, we were one of a handful companies really focused on mobile strategy and mobile application development in the country. I believe this would also need to be fact-checked, but I believe that it was 2010 or 2011 that Starbucks first released their mobile wallet. And so it was really the earliest days of companies paying attention to developing mobile wallets, developing mobile strategies, and building that into the strategy of how they were going to grow or sell their company. And we were really interested in being involved in how to partner with those companies, how to advise on that landscape, and then it's obviously been an interesting ride since then.
That's great. I love the story of founders. If you would indulge us, can you tell us when you had the idea that you wanted to go start this company, like what was that step you took when you knew, like, okay, this is it. I'm going for this. I'm chasing this, and this is my new direction.
So I started Motion Mobs my last semester in college, and I was working as a software developer building websites in college and really enjoyed what I was doing, but thought that generally there just wasn't enough resources for companies focused on where we were going at the time and really focused on mobile strategy, focused on the direction that was headed. And that was something that I really wanted to be a part of. And so that's how it started, was just, I'm really frustrated with this. This is something I want to solve. I'm not doing what I want to be doing. And I think it's something that I can fix with the right people. And that's exactly what we've done, is just pull the right people together and grow from there.
That's great. How do you find when you're having these conversations with companies around the world, and we've had the pleasure of getting to knowing each other through actually originally through a pitch competition, which you won and I judged, and I was happy to select y'all as the winner. But can give me a little kind of insight on what it feels like being a company based in Birmingham, but competing for worldwide business like you do.
Ever changing. I mean, it's a really interesting landscape, and it has been especially interesting. I mean, not just for us, but I'm sure for all companies going through the pandemic, of how that landscape looks and how much companies of all sizes have changed since the pandemic started. And so, now I think for us and for our business in the last couple of years, for instance, we have worked on several healthcare projects since the company's inception, but we've spent more time on healthcare projects because of the need for innovation in that space in the last few years, and have been really focused on how we could help and how we can make a difference with that. And so an element that I think sets us apart right now is, depending on the type of project, we have some pretty deep healthcare knowledge and are able to apply that to some of the changes that continue to go on in that industry.
This is a little bit of a side, but I think there's an amazing opportunity for innovation in healthcare with Web3 and blockchain technology. I mentioned this on the show a couple of weeks ago. I would love to be able to take all my medical records, put them on the blockchain, and then be able to give specific access to providers based on what access they needed, but also then be able to pass all those medical records down to my children, so that, we always talk about like, oh, what is your family's history of heart disease? I don't know, like whatever story your grandma told you about your uncle who died of a heart attack, who may have been hit in the head outside of a bar, chasing women. We don't really know. We don't know. So this idea that being able to have all of your medical data readily available to you, that you could parse out and give permission when you want to, along with the idea that, like, and Taylor, I'm sure you've seen this and you're working through this, but like this idea that, if Johnson & Johnson wants my medical data to do research, I can give them that permission, but then they have to pay me directly for using my data, as opposed to what happens now where the medical providers collect all our data and sell it off to these, companies already. Are you seeing any kind of ownership of data inside the healthcare space right now, or are we still too early for that?
Unfortunately, I would say that's early for where things are. And the biggest reason why, just from my perspective and from what I've seen, is the healthcare industry as a whole has gone through so much during the pandemic, from workforce instability that everyone hears about, of just how are we finding clinicians to help, and what kind of fire are we putting out on a week-by-week basis, that it was the balance of that with, we absolutely have to innovate because we've been behind in so many areas, and what do we start with first? And so, at least in the experience that we've had with our customers and through our customers and those healthcare systems, I think there's just still a sense of being really overwhelmed and trying to put out the largest fire first. And so I think those conversations are happening, but in an early stages way, and still in a how do we catch up, which I think is something that the healthcare industry has struggled with for a long time, is always like trying to catch up to even be current, much less look ahead.
Right.
But I do think that the pandemic was kind of the eye-opener for, you were really far, the healthcare industry as a whole was really far behind. And then when the pandemic hit, they were like, oh, we just weren't prepared for this. We weren't prepared for how to interact with a remote workforce. We weren't prepared for how to just move faster, more efficiently, how to send data, care instructions, and make sure we can get those to patients at the home. Or even just, this is something that I actually talked about with a client this week, or just how for patients to receive their own records faster and be able to exchange those within health systems or outside of a family of health systems. So if they're at one doctor and they need to go to a specialist, the difficulty of that right now is just
you're hitting on exactly what I want. Is I want access to my own medical records, right? I want all the records of the providers, and then I want some third party to hire motion mobs to create the ability for me to own this data myself and decide who I want to give access to, who I don't, and when I want to make that decision. And I think that can happen. But to your point, it's probably going to have to come from a third party, and then how do we get access to those records? So that's probably a much deeper philosophical conversation, but it makes sense to me, at least, that you should be able to own your own medical data.
Well, and, if you ask your provider, you're always going to say, well, of course, it's your records. We'll get those to you. The difficulty is, how are they getting the records to you? How do they make it easier for you to share your records, especially when it's a serious situation? How are they making it easier for you to share your records with other providers? And I do agree with you. I think the answer is it's going to take a company who wants to innovate, that's creating that and providing it to the consumers in a way that interacts with the most common, EHRs to make that possible.
And that's a great point. We have this conversation almost every week inside this show. It's about how easy is it for the user to be able to do what we're doing. And so a lot of times what I say about Web3 is until we make the user experience seamless that they don't even know it's a blockchain-based product, we're not going to win, right? You have to just get on your phone and just live life. And that's when blockchain-based products will start to win again.
I completely agree.
So, Taylor, what are you seeing out there kind of on the landscape when you're talking to your team and y'all are kind of vision casting? What do you see on the horizon of things that maybe are out there that our listeners don't even necessarily, pay attention to? Maybe something that's coming up pretty soon.
It's interesting. I still think, and I know that this is something that has been widely discussed, but I do think that it's an important discussion, is I still think that there are a lot of opportunities of lessons learned of how much things have changed during the pandemic. So I'll use a silly personal example. Right now, I have a rental car, and I'm in the process of purchasing a new car. And right now, it's so interesting because it feels like in every industry, if something breaks right now, the process of getting a part, getting a service provider, even locating, or in this case, finding a new car, is so much longer than it used to be. And it's such a process of how are we finding this part? How are we finding the right people to come? And major companies are just we're just having a really difficult time with manufacturers on parts, and we're having a really difficult time with a labor shortage. And so we are taking 10 to 20 times longer than we did 2 years ago. And so a lot of things seem to be revolving around how, are manufacturing companies recovering from that, and how do we become more efficient around logistics. We have a couple of logistics clients and a logistics factoring client, and that's something that we talk about at work a lot, is the importance of becoming as efficient as possible in how we're thinking about logistics in every industry and how we're making it more efficient for these fundamental industries to operate and make sure they're getting people goods and services that are really essential to work and life.
That's a really great point and a great segue, because we've talked a lot about this show. We've talked a lot on this show about when will the blockchain become practical to me. And we talk about the fact that 80% of the world's goods are tracked on what's called trade lens, this blockchain technology that the shipping companies use. So logistics, supply chain, clearly this is going to be, on the forefront of getting the technological solution solved. So it's really encouraging to hear that that's also what you're seeing and that people are actually looking for solutions, because I think part of the problem is people just assume that somebody else is going to solve the problem for them. And the good news is you are that somebody for people. So if people have ideas and they want to know how to solve their problems, what's a good way that they can get in touch with you?
They're welcome to reach out to me directly. I mean, my email address is Taylor, Taylor, at motionmobs.com. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer questions or happy to have a conversation. I mean, I think what you guys are discussing on the show is fascinating, and it's interesting to me just to see the direction that this is going and how different individuals and different companies are approaching solving some of these problems.
Well, Taylor, that's a perfect segue. And what we're going to do is we're going to come back after the break, and we're going to do this again if you're up for sticking around with us.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you soon when we come back on Beyond the Blockchain.
Welcome back to Beyond the Blockchain with Scott Tyndall.
Hey, folks. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Scott Tyndall. And joining us tonight, we have Taylor Peake from Motion Mobs. Taylor, thanks for sitting in with us for the back half of the hour.
Of course. Thank you.
Hey, being in Birmingham, you'll find this, appropriate. But the other day, we host the Auburn Radio Network here on 106.5, and I thought, the only solace I have, I'm an Auburn alum and fan, the only solace I have about Auburn Radio and hosting the football games on this channel is that it guarantees that my show will not be the worst product that is put out on this radio station this week. That's the only solace I have with this Auburn football season. But aside from that, Taylor, thanks again for joining us, and it's been a lot of fun the first half. But I want to dive in more into blockchain technology and how it's going to solve a lot of problems. And I think something that you and I have talked about previously is like the insurance world, like being able to have this what we call non-mutable ledger, like this ledger we can't change, it should make a difference in insurance, right?
Absolutely. I think it's a very logical solution to an everyday problem.
All right, explain to us how you think this is going to play out with insurance, and just remember our listeners, they know a little bit about blockchain technology. We've been doing this for a few weeks, but we're still newbies, right? We're all still learning here. So walk us through this kind of idea on how, insurance is going to maybe change for me in the future.
Well, okay, I'll give two examples. One from just the perspective of ownership and verification. I mean, I think that's something that is fundamentally difficult from a process of, if you are selling anything that's titled, a car, a boat, anything that you own a title to, and you're going through the process of selling a vehicle or trading a vehicle, the titling process is extremely dated. I was talking to someone the other day that was saying they had an issue where they had purchased something and the seller didn't sign their name exactly the way that it was printed on the title. So, like, for example, they may have left off a middle initial or something of that nature. And so something minor, but it caused an issue within the transaction because of the paper process of just sending all of that back and forth for verification. And it caused all kinds of issues because, if you have a lien holder involved and there's an issue with the title, then that can cause delays and just can be very painful from a verification perspective. So using the blockchain for verification of ownership, especially in something as simple as a titling process, I think would just make life easier and prevent some manual administrative processes too.
Yeah, that's a great point. It kind of reminds me of something I saw recently about provenance inside of like art and collectibles, right? Like, how do you prove ownership? How do you if you can prove provenance and you can show who the previous owners were and go all the way back to the creation of the piece, then that piece of art is substantially more valuable than when you can't prove I guess what we call chain of custody. Like in the legal field, we call that chain of custody. Like knowing who has had this piece of property along the way. Alongside your point as well, I heard a friend tell me about in Mexico and many other Latin American countries that there are issues with title and people selling the property to multiple people and offering multiple titles, and then it's just a race to the courthouse as to who is going to record the title first, right? So you might end up buying a piece of property that they don't actually have the legal right to sell you because they're taking advantage of that antiquated system. So there again, blockchain technology assumedly would solve that problem, right?
Absolutely. And aside from the ethical issues with that, the core thing is speed, too, is because you're dealing with such an antiquated process and you're waiting so long for that information to be recorded that there's so many bad things that can happen in between. And it's so many opportunities for, like I mentioned before, if there's a lien holder involved, it becomes even more complicated. Because then, in the case that there are multiple titles out there and there's a lien holder involved, then you have an issue not only with the new owner but with the lien holder too, and it just gets messy really quickly. And so if there's a faster way to verify that transaction and verify the rightful owner, it protects everyone more and just makes everything move faster.
So I mentioned earlier that I love the way your brain works. So give us a little dip inside of your brain and tell us what makes you excited right now about this kind of emerging technology and what you really focus on that really gets, your brain like in this good, productive hyper mode.
Well, I mentioned earlier that, we've spent a lot of time working with healthcare in the last couple of years, and I would say I'm still really focused on how we can improve that industry and how emerging technology can really make a difference there. Because I think for so many of us, myself included, we watched and have continued. We have a small outbreak right now in Birmingham. We watched so many friends and loved ones get sick or have serious problems going through the last couple of years. And healthcare being an industry that is so far behind that, it kind of hurt earlier to be like, no, Scott, I think we're still a little early on that. I think people are thinking about it, but I just don't think that we're there yet. And so finding ways that make it easier for the healthcare industry to say, yes, this is something that will save me money. This is something that will make a difference. And this is something that I can implement and get excited about. It takes a lot, and so it feels like if you can figure out how to do it in the healthcare industry, I think you can have adoption anywhere because it's just so difficult to even get someone's attention, even if you can save them money, even if it's better for the patient, because everyone's just so overwhelmed. And so I like starting with how is this going to affect healthcare, what technology is going to be helpful for consumers and get the healthcare system's attention. And if you can figure out that piece of it, it becomes much easier in other industries.
That really makes sense to me because the healthcare industry is essential at everyone, right? There's not anyone out here listening to the show that this doesn't impact, that it doesn't touch them. I think where you're going down this line makes a lot of sense, especially if we can get these healthcare systems to understand that, increasing the response rate of great patient outcomes makes a big difference financially. They're getting reimbursed on their Medicare rate based on patient satisfaction and those outcomes. And, if blockchain technology can help them understand how to do that better, then the patient wins, the patient gets a better experience, and the hospital should get higher reimbursement rates and should make more money, theoretically, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do not have a healthcare background, which I think makes it even more interesting for me because I don't have the perspective that some people do who have worked in this industry for so long. But it's fascinating to me to think about all of the opportunities there are for making this easier because, like you said, it really does affect everyone. And there are some, really large players in the industry doing interesting things like, for example, my husband is a financial executive for a company owned by Hearst. And so even seeing like large media companies take a focus and an interest in like, we want to allocate initiatives, directives, money to really changing the healthcare industry is exciting, especially to see just other industries. They've been in it for a while, but really kind of highlighted and try to figure out how to grow and change and make it work.
I mean, that makes sense to me. And I'm excited to hear that because I'm an eternal optimist, and I'm always hoping that, humanity can create better, faster, more efficient, better results for everyone. So, that's great. With you being in Birmingham, what do you see in the startup scene up there right now? This is a little off topic from blockchain, but like, what are you seeing bubbling up there?
So, I'm Scott. I promise I'm not just trying to talk about healthcare the whole time. It's funny that your question did bring up something though that we've done recently. There is a nonprofit in Birmingham that I'm really excited about called Prosper, and they have started a healthcare accelerator program, and it's something that I've really been paying attention to. Scott, I think you'd really enjoy it. You should come up and meet some of these companies and see what they're doing. And they're from all over the country, in some cases all over the world. And the just caliber of startups that are coming into that program and kind of the mentorship that they're getting from some local health system executives, from some payer executives, and then technology executives on how they can grow their company and raise money here, I think has been really exciting for Birmingham. So that's something that I've been paying attention to, and I think is really exciting and is relatively new. They started the program, I think this is their second cohort, so maybe 18 months or 2 years ago.
That is very exciting, and thank you for the invitation and the offer. And of course, I would be elated to come and spend some time and come up to Birmingham and visit with you and those folks up there. Taylor, this has been a pleasure. Anytime I get to have a friend on the show, it makes it even more fun. So thanks for joining us. And, I hope people go check you out at Motion Mobs. And, if you've got a technological solution or an idea and you need a solution, Taylor Motion Mobs is your person. All right, when we come back, Beyond the Blockchain, we're going to talk to Tate and Footium.
Welcome back to Beyond the Blockchain with Scott Tyndall.
Hey folks, welcome back to Beyond the Blockchain. I'm your host, Scott Tyndall, and I'm excited you're joining us here on another Wednesday night here on 106.5 FM. And Philip, look, we're going to get fact-checked, but as far as we know, this may be one of the only live radio shows in the world about blockchain technology and Web3.
Yep.
I don't know if that's true or not. We're going to get fact-checked, but I believe it.
Let's just go with that.
There can't be that many. All right, so look, I appreciate you if you're still listening. We had a wonderful time visiting with Taylor Peake from Motion Mobs. This group of folks in Birmingham is really creating something special. The way they approach technology and the way they approach innovation is something really unique. If that's something that you're interested in, if you have a good idea, I really encourage you to reach out to Taylor. Now, I don't say that because she's a personal friend. I say that because I believe it. But she's also a personal friend. For the rest of the show, Philip, we're going to talk about something really interesting. We're going to talk about owning a soccer team in the future of the Web3 and everything that goes along with it.
Virtual.
It's basically like video games, but you can buy, sell, build, grow, all those things. All right. It's pretty fascinating. It's out there. It's on the edge. But it's the future. So thankfully tonight to help us understand it, we've got Tate Richards joining us again. Tate, how are you, my friend?
Hi there. I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic, buddy. Give us an update on how the season's going. It's been a couple weeks since we talked to you. I know a couple weeks ago, we were getting ready for a big match, and then, you and I talked offline. You had a little bit of an injury, but tell us what's going on now.
What's going on now? Well, now I'm fully back, thankfully. Happy. I played the last two games. We're at the top of our conference, which is like the hardest conference that you can play in our division in America, which is great. And on top of that, we are now ranked 5th in the nation. Should be higher, but with all due time.
Yeah, 5th is not too bad.
Yeah,
How many more matches?
Teams starting to gel well together, and it's becoming very, very enjoyable.
Excellent. How many matches left in the season before you start to reach the playoffs?
Well, we have now 5 more matches to go in conference. And if we win all 5, then we've won conference, the conference, and then we have conference tournament, which is 3 games, and then we'll have the national championship, which will also be, I think, total 5 games.
So
if you get to the finals.
So just a few more matches left in the season.
We're just taking it game by game.
Yeah, of course. So just a few more matches left in the season. So we appreciate the fact that you've got all this on your plate as well as school, and yet still you have time to join us tonight to talk about Footium. So, we talked a few weeks ago, we're on a quest to buy a Footium team, a club, right? This is going to be part of what we do as the show. It's going to be a part of a project we can track forever. So I know you've been looking at some of these Footium clubs. Give me an idea on a couple that you found that maybe we should pay attention to.
Well, I looked at 3. All the clubs are very different and very, like, all of them have individual qualities where, they can be utilized differently and perceived differently and have different values, like I said. And so there's 3 that I was looking at that are kind of classified as like a top, which are like the more expensive ones. Like a mid, which is, I'd say, not as expensive as the top, but kind of still holds value. And then you'd have like a bottom tier, and they all kind of, it's dependent on whether we would like to, build a club, or kind of have an established club, or kind of have a club, like I said, that's ranked in like the middle somewhere, and that we also need to build on.
Okay. Give me an idea on what kind of price we're talking about, right? If we want a club that's kind of built, more established, then this what is that going to cost us?
Like the top, like not top, but like roughly around the top is probably around, we're speaking 2 Ethereum.
2 Ethereum. So that's trading at what? Like, what is that going to cost us today in American dollars?
Roughly.
I'm sorry, what?
Like 2.5K roughly.
All right, so 2,500. Okay, so now that's the top tier. What if we want to take a mid-tier team and try and build them?
A mid-tier would probably be between like 500 to 6 to 700, anywhere in between there. US. Okay, and then if we want to start from the bottom to the top, what's that going to cost us? Between 200 to a little bit over 300, maybe 350 max is where you could get like a decent enough lower ranked team.
So that's interesting to me, and that's not a decision we have to make today, but I think this is something we need to break down as we go forward, right? It's like, all right, top tier team's going to cost us $2,500, mid tier team maybe $500, lower tier team $200, $300. Like, so what we've got to decide now is, what can we do to increase the value of these clubs, and does it make sense to take one of these mid-tier or lower-tier clubs and trying to increase their value very fast, or do we jump in this top-tier league now while this is still an early development and be one of the top clubs in the world immediately? I think that's not something we have to decide today, but it's something I want to explore over the next couple of weeks for sure.
No, definitely. And I was also thinking about that, and I was thinking if, Beyond the Blockchain was to invest in a Footium club, being kind of new into the whole Footium world, it would be kind of interesting and also a little bit fun to kind of possibly invest in like a mid-tier, low-tier kind of team that allows you to learn more about it. It feels more like, when you built a team up from, say, bottom to or mid, kind of all the way to the top, it gives that a little bit more satisfaction than it would if you were just to outright get a top-tier club, if you understand what I'm saying.
All right, I agree with that. So right now we're going to go ahead and strike the top tier. We're not going to buy a top tier club. That's too easy. We are not easy people. We like a challenge, right? So
Exactly.
let's go ahead and knock that top tier off our list. So now what we'll do going into next week is let's start preparing mid tier and not low, but lower tier clubs that we want to evaluate and we want to assess, because I'm with you. I don't think there's as much satisfaction in taking a top tier team and just being a little bit better, right? I'd much rather take one of these mid tier, lower emerging tier teams. And you know what it reminds me of? Tate, have you seen the show Welcome to Wrexham at all?
Yeah, I have actually. Only a few episodes, I think.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that same idea, right? So we take that Welcome to Wrexham model. Let's go find a club and go put our resources and our experiences and our relationships behind this club and see if we can, turn it into something that, Footium pays attention to.
Yeah, exactly. And one more thing that I wanted to add on top of that is each club has its own kind of description where they describe the clubs. For example, one of the clubs that I was looking at says that it's a professional association and that the supporters are passionate and sometimes will sing louder than the opposition. Like each club has its own little description, but some clubs don't. Like the lower ranked clubs don't. And so I think it would be really cool if either like a mid tier kind of low tier team that doesn't have a description, kind of we get to build and shape our own description of the club.
I like that better. I would always rather build and shape the description of the club. Tate, one of the reasons you and I originally started spending time together was because of that, right? It's that shared vision, that shared idea of growth and grit and gratitude, relationships, innovation and technology and teamwork and everything goes in it. Tate, thanks for joining us tonight. It's been a lot of fun. We'll talk next week more about Footium, and we'll see you next Wednesday night right here on 106.5 for Beyond the Blockchain.